Hello my good students, I hope you all are doing well. This is a short video where I want to go over a few things. First would be how do you work with the book and what is the best practice of using, or how do you actually use the files and then practice the code and write the code using a text editor. And I've covered multiple text editors, but one that I would recommend that you can stick with is your Visual Studio Code. So we'll talk about that, and again you will see me lecturing using another editor called Eclipse, or you can use Notepad, or you can use Visual Studio Code. Whichever you would like to use, I would recommend that you stick with one. My preference is Visual Studio Code because you can also work with Git and GitHub in controlling the version of your files, which is extremely important in HTML. And this is also called the source control, which you will also need to be using later on when you get into other programming languages. So Visual Studio Code seems to be a good text editor. But again, Eclipse is also a pretty good and very widely used text editor. All right, so let's get started. First off, you will see, well, let me back up. Is it important that you buy the book? My answer is yes. And I'll tell you why. The book has a lot of information that is all concentrated and modularized under individual chapters, and it covers certain objectives. Also, with the book, what you can download is your student data files. Although I would also upload the data files for you under every single week, but I think the book would give you more information about the individual code. Can I not find information about code from Google using an AI? Absolutely you can. Can I use AI for my class? I say yes. However, I would recommend that you still try to do the code by typing the code. Well, I'm not saying try to do all the busy work, but try to understand what the code means. I'm not asking you to remember every single tag that you would need. However, it's important to know what is the one that makes a text capitalized. What is the one that I need to use for when I am trying to create a link? What is the one that I want to use if I want to put a paragraph, on my text? So if you get any error while you're typing the code, if it is not working the way it should be, I encourage you to use an AI, use the other information or other Google, web platform to find out what may be wrong and trying to see what is the correct format of using it. So use AI for learning purposes. However, for doing busy work, you can always use AI to create some of the structure for you. But make sure you understand so that if something does not work, you can pinpoint to that section and get it corrected. Remember, when you complete a class, you're expected to understand and work with HTML pages. And you also are supposed to be having some kind of an understanding of the code and be able to apply and use them. Okay. So when you apply for a job, if your boss realizes that anything that you can do can be done with AI, guess what happens? He's going to hire AI, or he's going to get a subscription of an AI and get rid of you. So whenever you use AI for the class, or any other classes for that matter, make sure you use it as a tool. Use it as a learning experience. It is almost like using a dictionary or using spell check. When you write an email to your peer or to your boss, if you make spelling mistake, you can use a dictionary. And if you still make a spelling mistake, the boss is going to ask you, did you not run it through a spell checker? So using AI is almost needed for producing good quality and quick, efficient work. However, the content is where your expertise comes in. Your creativity is where your expertise come in. So as you can correct your syntax or the code using an AI platform, make sure you understand what you're doing, so in the next web page or in the next code that you're writing, you can use it correctly to get the required outcome or to meet your client need. All right. Now, the reason I have you on this page is because every time you create a website, you will see that the data file that I have zipped and uploaded, once you unzip it, you will see that you have this folder structure. So one folder is called HTML1, and then inside you have a folder called tutorial, review, code 1, 2, 3, 4, case, and demo. So what is this? If you go to the next page, if I go to my next page, see how it shows a visual representation of the individual code, and it also gives you a little description of this. So this information, I'm not asking you to memorize every single tag, because that's not useful. As a human being, it's almost impossible to keep up with every single tag. However, just by looking at a tag, know what it's trying to do. This is the body, this is how you start a body and end your body and a tag. This is your HTML element, this is where your heading is, this is where your doc type is. So as you go through the chapter, make sure to read and understand what those individual things means, okay? Because you're going to be assessed in your quizzes, and again, it is for your understanding that you need this. But when you start working with them, you can use these files. So let me go through and go to the end. So as I remembered, I showed you how the folder structure is broken out. So in this chapter, you will start working with a basic data file, but then you will be adding more to it depending upon the content that the book is teaching. So in this case, we're going to start with this ct_start.html file, which you'll already find. So this file that you just see should be opened within your text editor. Okay, so this is the tutorial. So that's why all the files that you need for tutorial is within that folder. But as you move through the chapters, you will find there are cases. So for those cases, the files that are required, the base files that are required, are included in there. So your job would be to start with those base files and then continue to add individual elements as it would explain in the chapter. And that's how you would learn. So this one talks about what an element is, and then how is it that you create paragraphs. So this is their initial paragraph tag, and this is how you would end it. So whenever we are talking about an element, we are talking about an element like this, P and P. When we are talking about an element that has the starting tag and the ending tag. This is what it means by the ending tags. There are certain elements that you would not need an ending tag like this, and it will give you more examples and more of those individual tags. So having a basic understanding of what P stands for, it's paragraph. How does an element work? So you have an element, and again, this is just, you have to replace it with P or whatever element that you're dealing with. So a strong, maybe if you're trying to make it capital, so if you're trying to use a element like strong or a paragraph, this is where you're going to replace the element with those element name like P, and then you're going to end your element. So this is how your element is going to work. Now again, sometimes you would also see empty elements where you would only need one-sided element tag. Okay, and again, it's gives you more and more examples as you go through. Now this is how the structure works. So this is your head, beginning of your head, and beginning and the end of your head element, and inside you're going to type in your content. So when you're using a basic structure like this, you might find in your files the basic structure is already given. It will come in and say, okay, now go into the head content and type more content in. Now go inside the body content and make sure that you close your HTML. So that's why it is important that you understand, have some idea about what these elements mean and how does that work. Now, remember I was telling you about the tutorial. So these are the things that you're going to be doing. It gives you a basic layout of how this should be looking with the files that you already have received, but then you have to make certain changes, and it will explain what those things are going to do as you move along. All right, so this is your basic code, and then it'll say, okay, now you want to come in and add some content in there. So this is how you're going to follow. So this gives you some basic elements and their description. All right, now let's move on to the Visual Studio Code interface, and I'm going to open my Visual Studio Code interface. Remember, you can download it from Visual Studio Code, and then this is what you're going to be seeing. So the first time we're going to open it, you might see that there's going to be a little warning over here which says this window is not trusted. So just click on it and make sure it is trusted, because once you have a trusted window, you are going to run the code, you can do a debugging, and all enabled extensions are going to be activated. But if you do not have this trusted, some of these things are going to be missing. So if I now change it, so this is how it changed to a restricted mode. So I can just come in and trust it, and that's going to do it. Now, when you download your Visual Studio Code, I definitely encourage you to go to the help and look at some of these video tutorials, especially the one that is at the very end, which is the version control. This is a very, very good basic explanation of how to do your version control. Okay, but also it talks about how you can do your debugging, how to add your extensions, how do you personalize, productive tips. These are really, really good videos that is included with Visual Studio Code. And as you can see, you can go to the setup. It can give you an overview. It will tell you if you, as I said, this one can be used for Mac, Linux, Windows. And that is why I kind of like using Visual Studio Code as an editor. And again, you can add additional components. So this is how you can get to your Visual Studio interface code. So now coming back over here, this is where you would open your source control. Since this is the very first one, I'm not going to get in there. I want you to go ahead and go through this video first. But the first thing you got to do is create your file. So once I go to my file, I would create a new folder. Okay, so I can open a new folder, I can create a new folder. So if I look for opening a folder, it is going to be looking for a folder that I have already created. But I can also create a workspace. So if I go to my workspace, it basically gives you, where I want to store my information. Again, this is our school computer, so it has been set up by IT. If you're working on your own computer, you are going to be doing things a little differently. But my recommendation is, I want you to go, remember this is my cloud setup. So if you want to store things in cloud, you can do that. I also recommend that you can go directly to your hard drive, which is your C drive. I can go here, and then I can go to my hard drive. I'm sorry, not my desktop, but I can go to my hard drive and create a folder within my documents folder. Maybe you can name it as CTS 1851 and start keeping all your assignment at one place. I would want to break it down into chapter 1, chapter 2. So once you go into your Windows, you can create a folder called CTS 1851, and then you can create another folder inside called chapter 1, and then inside that chapter 1 you can store all your data files and break it out like that. Now this needs to be created first, and that's when you can come in and say, okay, open a workspace or open that particular folder. Okay. Otherwise, you can also start with a new file. But I say, or my recommendation is, create a folder and then go to that particular folder and start your new file from there. So if let's say I start with a new file, and or I can open a folder. I have to now come back and set something up in my hard drive. Let's say I try to do this. So since I mentioned about this, and again, you can still store things on your cloud or on your Microsoft Cloud account that you have from your school. So you can go to your cloud account, create a folder called CTS 1851, and then in that case everything that you're working on gets stored on the cloud and you can access it from anywhere. So it all depends upon how you want to go about creating this. Okay, or you can come into your hard drive and create your folder. So if I come to my hard drive, I would go to my users, okay, and then maybe go to my documents and maybe create a folder here called CTS 1851. Now once I come inside, and I'm going to select my folder. So at this point, every time I would open my Visual Studio Visual Studio Code, it's going to give me, it said, okay, do you want to trust? And I said, yes, I'm going to trust. So now I'm inside my folder. Now, if I want to open a new file here, so I can open a new file and then start working from here. All right. Again, if I open my new file, I can say first page.html. Okay. Now if I come into my, oops, never got saved. So file, new file, first.html. And here we go. This is my first.html. So if I come to my HTML 1851, this is my first.html file. Now, this is where I need to come in and start typing. Now, over here, it will give you some options. So for this one, I can open a chat. I can select a language. So if I select a language, and in this case, I'll be using my HTML. So from here on, it's going to know that this is how I'm going to be using this. Also, if I now want to go and do some source control, I can do it from here, but I really want you to watch the video before I get into the source control. So this is how you're going to be using the Visual Studio Code. Thank you.